go. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, cool. So here's the app. It's at app.metalextech.com/LexGrow. We'll eventually have a bunch of LexGrow related apps on here. LexGrow stands for, basically legal escrow. Means law in Latin, right? And so we're going to click set up a deal. And what this takes you to is Contract Builder. And I'll explain what this is. But you'll note that we've deployed this on various networks, Ethereum, even Sepolia testnet, Base, Optimism, Arbitrum. We'll add ZK Sync there at some point. Ran into some deployment issues there, but I'm going to do this demo on Base because I have some easy tokens on Base. So what you're seeing here on the right-hand side is basically a contract template. We call this style of template a cybernetic legal agreement. And the reason for that, and so, it's called the Cybernetic Token Exchange Agreement in this case, meaning that its purpose is to agree upon the exchange of two tokens for one another, mediated with our tools and with a smart contract escrow that is a LexGrow. And you'll see if you scroll down here, it's not a terribly long agreement. It's about 17 pages, and a lot of that is just defined terms. But what you'll start to see as you scroll down here is that this does not look like ordinary agreements, right? Because it has in here these green variables, that I'll explain in a minute. But, these are basically smart contract variables. Right. So we have a smart contract sitting on Ethereum, and we're going to tell you, if you want to do certain things under the agreement, if you want to perform certain obligations under this agreement, you're actually going to call certain functions on that smart contract. And so we make that very clear. And also the entire kind of, you're probably used to typical legal agreements or typical legal templates where basically you look at the thing and it's got a bunch of blanks in it, right? It's got a blank for a name. It's got a blank for a date. It's got a blank for a number of some property that needs to be sold and describing that property or something like that, right? And here, basically, everywhere where a blank would ordinarily be, we actually have one of these variables, right? One of these smart contract variables. So what's actually going to happen here is we're going to fill in parameters for these variables on this left-hand side. Right. And we're going to call a smart contract on Ethereum that's basically a registry. It knows what this agreement is. It knows the variables for this agreement. And the contract is basically a registry for everyone who's done an instance of this agreement. Right. So this is a template. When you fill in all the variables and both parties sign it, at that point, it becomes an agreement, an actual legally binding thing. Right. And the parameters that it has for those particular parties we're going to input in here are going to be stored on chain, right? So it basically becomes kind of like an on-chain agreement, right? Anyone, and in this case, it's a public one, right? Pros and cons to that, obviously. But so anyone, any website, that knows what the contract ABI, knows the address is, and knows the IPFS address of this agreement, which we're actually going to tell you what it is right down here, right? This is the IPFS address of what you're looking at here. Anyone could display the information about it, at least know who the parties are and all that sort of thing, right? So you could imagine how this kind of turns into like an Internet of Agreements type of thing, right? But I'll explain more about that later. So this particular deal here is what we would call a delayed closing deal or a deferred closing deal for two parties to swap two tokens in a certain ratio, right? Just that simple. It's like doing an OTC token deal. And what do I mean by a delayed closing deal or a deferred closing deal? Well, in law, there are basically two kinds of deals, right? There's the type of deal that we do in DeFi all the time, and in crypto all the time, which is a simultaneous sign close deal, right? When you go and swap your ETH for some USD or some actually what you should be doing is swapping some USD for your ETH on Uniswap. You should be buying and not selling. Then you're doing basically a simultaneous sign close deal, right? There's the transaction is the closing, right? You get your ETH right away. You get your ETH as soon as you give your USDC, right? And you're basically agreeing to do the deal at the same time as you're doing the deal, right? There's no legal agreement in that case, but you could imagine, click a quick terms of service or something like that. It would be a simultaneous sign close legal transaction, right? A delayed closing deal in business, in real business and off-chain business, if you've ever bought real estate, for example, that'd be the classic case, but M&A, stock purchases, all kinds of things, right, are really delayed sign close deals, right? Deferred closing deals. I would say, this is probably the majority of high ticket commerce outside of crypto, is a delayed sign close deal. Even when you do a buy, like a limit order or something on Coinbase, right? That's basically a delayed sign close deal, right? That price, but there may be some time before the trade is actually executed, if ever, and the deal, you actually pay the money and the deal actually closes, right? So this is the vast majority of commerce is delayed sign close deals. So, and this, real estate is probably the example familiar to most people, right? So why is a real estate sign closed? Why is it deferred closing deal? Well, basically, you have to you sign an agreement that you're willing to buy the property at a certain price, and then there's a bunch of things that need to happen, a bunch of closing conditions that need to be satisfied before the actual exchange of title, can take place, right? But it would not be worth anyone's time to go and do all those very many things. Dig up title records, buy title insurance, deposit funds into a third party escrow, get property insurance, a million things, right? Get a legal opinion that someone has valid title to the property so they can sell it to you. Whatever it might be, all these things. Get a mortgage, right? Get a mortgage or sign a mortgage. It would not be worth doing all those things and doing all that work and, spending money on lawyers and all these things if you didn't have a binding commitment up front that once you do those things, that indeed you will be able to buy the property at that price, right? So that's why we do delayed sign closing deals. In the case of a token exchange, you can imagine various reasons why you might want to do it. Let's just say, for example, it's a large amount of tokens and they're stuck in some multi-sig, and maybe it's even a multi-sig of multi-sigs, or maybe if it's even stuck in a DAO, right? And you need to do a bunch of things to actually get those tokens and make them available to do this trade. You would not want to go to the effort of making a DAO proposal, making a multi-sig proposal, doing all these things, unless you had a firm commitment deal, right? You would not want to, if you needed to get a legal opinion off chain, that each party actually owns these tokens and they're solvent. The tokens aren't subject to the claims of some creditor or something. You would want to sign a deal before you went to the pain and expense of getting those opinions. If you needed to borrow money to buy the tokens to be able to sell them, you might want to do it. Or if you're doing some kind of complicated hedge over a 6-month period or something, and this agreement is basically like a swap designed to do that hedge, again, you want a firm commitment to know you can actually get the tokens, right? All kinds of reasons why you might want to sign a deal before you close a deal, either shortly before or perhaps well in advance before. I used to do corporate M&A deals for a living, multi-billion-dollar deals. And some of those, there were very many of them, the big ticket ones, were always delayed sign close. And, one of the big reasons for that is any type of a big merger in the United States. I think the threshold might be over $100 million, over $200 million. I don't know what it is currently, but there's an antitrust review that has to happen to make sure the deal isn't anti-competitive, right? And in some cases, that antitrust review could take a year or more, right? It's two government agencies that do it, the Department of Justice and the FTC, right? And so, these things take time, and you have to get a shareholder vote. If they're public, if the target is public, that lining up that shareholder vote, requires organizing an entire meeting and getting proxy solicitors involved, getting ISS to rate the deal, a million things, right? A million things. It's very complicated. So it could take a year or even more. Right. So delayed sign cloning deals are very important. And we want to do a lot of these things, right? We see like the hybrid law code approach as being very useful for that. So all that being said, let's go ahead and fill out the deal, right? So, I'm going to put my name. Now, of course, you could put anything here. You could put, Lex Node, right? It's all, but is your counterparty is going to see this, right? After we fill in all the information, we're going to send it to the counterparty to sign. And are they going to accept a legal agreement with Lex Node? Or are they going to want Gabriel Shapiro, right? Maybe they know Lex Node is Gabriel Shapiro. Maybe they feel like they could prove that if they ever needed to. But, they also might want to sue me if I don't perform my end of the deal. So maybe they want my legal name in there, and then maybe they want to sign the deal otherwise, right? And then contact details. This would be like where to send me legal notices under the agreement. So basically, like, if they want to sue me or something and sort of a lawsuit on me, consenting to that, right? Or if they want to send some other notification under the deal, I'm consenting to that, use that address. Now for tokens, I'm on base here, right? Yeah. So I'm going to do a swap I have this token Morpho AI. I'm going to offer to swap some Morpho for some Anon, I think, that I have on my other address. So I just need the contract address. So I'll go to Etherscan to get that. Got that now, and I'm going to put that in. Okay, and now this is looking at my address. It's looking at that token and making sure that I actually have it. That way it doesn't think that it's kind of very. So maybe I'll do like 50 Morpho. How much do I have? Oh, I own like 100 of it. I'm going to do less. I'm going to do like 5. All right. And then now I fill in the confirming party's information and my other Telegram account. And then it needs my blockchain address, right? It can't read that directly right now because the wallet I'm connected from is the wallet of the proposing party right now. It's the proposing party filling in the information of the counterparty, right? So they're not connected. So the website doesn't know yet what that is, right? So, find that other account and it's this one. Okay. And I'm going to plug that in. And then what's the token that I want to buy from this person, right? What's that token? Well, I want to buy a non from this person because that's what they have. So going to go here, going to get the contract address, copy that. And we probably will at some point add sort of like draw from a third-party API, kind of like Uniswap does, like draw from the CoinGecko API to get common tokens, but we didn't actually add that yet, but that would be simpler, obviously. And how much Anon do I want to say? 410 Anon token. And here it's asking for an expiration date. By the way, anytime you want to know what one of these fields means, there's a tooltip that explains how it feeds back to the agreement. So here this says, I may look at it, I may not know. What is expiry? What does that mean? This is the expiration time set forth in the agreement. So basically, if the deal doesn't close by this date, right, then it's basically terminated and, we go our separate ways, so to speak. And in theory, there could be many reasons why it doesn't close in time. But one possible reason would be that one of the parties just got cold feet and never did what they needed to do to close the deal. In that case, that would mean that they breached the contract, right? Because there is this covenant here that says, as promptly as reasonably practicable, you're supposed to deposit your tokens, right, into the smart contract escrow that I'll tell you about. And so, if you didn't do that, well, maybe there's an issue. Maybe you breached the contract. Well, or maybe you have a good excuse, right? But it all depends on the fact, right? So, so I'm going to set an expiration date, for for my birthday. All right, I'm going to set it for my birthday. And then this legal agreement URI here is hard-coded because, we don't want you using a different agreement. The app is designed for this, right? So we just hard-code that, but you can know what it is. And then you get to choose your governing law, right? This is going to be the law that the agreement is interpreted under. I think Delaware is pretty good to state that respects freedom of contract. Texas is another one in the U.S., respects freedom of contract. You could also do Cayman Islands, BVI. Okay, yeah. So you could choose any governing law, and you can also just specify, we have some suggestions, but you could also specify anything, Timbuktu, And then you have a choice of dispute resolution method. So you could do binding arbitration, or these are the two options we offer, binding arbitration and court resolution. And these tie into exhibits on the back, right? So court adjudication is one option, and that would basically mean, let's just say, you pick Timbuktu for your governing law jurisdiction, that you're agreeing to go sue each other in the courts of law of Timbuktu if there is a dispute over the contract. Alternatively, if you picked binding arbitration, then you would do confidential binding arbitration under the law of Timbuktu, but using the rules of the International Chamber of Commerce. And I mean, these are opinionated. Obviously, there's a million ways you could slice and dice dispute resolution procedures. So, that's why there is this field for other, and you could paste in any type of dispute resolution, provision that you want, right? Roll of the dice, right? By, a third party dungeon master, whatever you want, right? And then there's also this. So as I mentioned, this is a delayed sign closed deal. There aren't really many closing conditions for this, right? The two closing conditions would be that each party had actually deposited these tokens in a subsequent step. So deposited, the five Morpheus AI tokens and deposited 10 Anon tokens. And there really aren't closing conditions other than that in this case. But unless you want to add some, right? And then you could add any conditions that you wanted, right? You could say, Morpheus AI DAO. I don't even know if there is one, to be honest. Must approve the transaction prior to the close, right? Or whatever, right? You could say, you could say anything. Right. So this kind of enables you to just specify anything arbitrary. Now we do in the smart contracts, which I'll talk more about the smart contracts in a second, but we do have hooks to set up basically any kind of oracle as a closing condition. Right. So we could, let's just say one of the conditions was that, the market price of Morpheus AI be $100 per Morpheus, in order for the deal to close, right? It doesn't have to close otherwise. Well, we could create a custom condition for that, right? And it would like plug into like Uniswap TWAP or something like that, or some Chainlink Oracle to measure the price of Morpheus AI, right? And there's many, another type of condition could be like literally this DAO condition there could be a smart contract that just watches for that DAO approval, right? And treats it as a condition to the closing on chain, right? Well, let me explain what's actually happened. So basically, now that all the variables are filled in, if I go to sign and propose, it's now warning me not to use centralized exchange addresses to make sure that these are, blockchain addresses, preferably, I guess, externally owned accounts in this case. Now it's prompting me to sign this trend. So this is now me as the proposing party signing this agreement. Now, what has happened? What has occurred? Well, I actually have not only signed this agreement, and this is why all the things in there are blockchain variables. All those variables, my name, the other party's name, the tokens we're going to exchange, the contact details, yes, this have all been written on chain in the registry of what we call a tripler that basically records every time someone agrees to this template. You could think of the template as sort of like a type of agreement, right? And then it's like, okay, you're actually instantiating it as a particular agreement between two particular parties, right? It's actually a lot like smart contract inheritance, right? Or any type of code library module inheritance, right? But what we did at the same time as signing is we actually, there's also a factory contract for Lexcros, for escrow smart contracts. So when we signed through that Ricardian tripler, at the same time, there was deployed through a Lexcro factory, new specific escrow smart contract matching the same parameters that I set for the legal agreement. And that is basically going to become our escrow tool for the legal agreement and, in a sense, sort of deal lifecycle management tool, right? So, for example, if we want to terminate this agreement early, which is an option, right? If both parties agree, you can terminate an agreement before it's closed, right? That's always the case. You would call a function on that Lexcro smart contract to terminate it, right? And that would also terminate the agreement. So it's a mirroring relationship. And by doing the signing of the agreement, the signing and the parameterization of the agreement in the same step as you deploy the Lexcro with the matching parameters, right? You kind of make sure that everything matches, right? As opposed to the more typical situation where you might go and sign a legal agreement and then you ask some coder to go and deploy a smart contract and set the variables and match, and you hope that there's no misunderstanding or anything in that process such that they don't match. It just handles it all for you, right? It's deal management, deal execution. So now what's happened here is that basically I have signed the agreement, but it's a bilateral agreement, right? So I also need my counterparty to sign the agreement, or else there's no deal. There's no actual agreement. So what I'm going to do is there's a link here meant to be shared with your counterparty, right? And at this point, I'm going to share that link with myself, right? Because I'm the only one here. So I'm just going to paste that into my browser, right? And I'm going to change. Yeah, let me see how this can work here. I'm doing this by myself. So I'm just going to change that wallet, going to log out of this one. I'm going to connect the other one. So now it's like, just pretend I'm a different person, right? A counterparty to myself, so to speak, not to get too schizophrenic. And the proposing party has shared this link with me. He says, hey, the deal's all set up. I put in the variables. Here's the link. You just need to go and sign it. right? You should review everything, right? So, okay, cool. Now it's showing, so now confirming party is on top because I'm the confirming party, not the proposing party. So there's no longer anything to fill in. The proposing party has completed all that, but I do want to review this info, right? Before I sign. Is this really the token I want to trade? Is the amount of that token I want to trade? Is this, my proper contact information? Is this my proper name? And so forth. And let's just assume that I'm cool with all this, right? All the details are correct. I want to do I want to do the agreement. This is a trade I like. This is an agreement I like. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sign it. Okay. So now I've signed the agreement. Now we have an agreement. We're legally bound to this agreement. I've agreed to buy 5 Morpheus AI tokens with 10 Anon tokens, subject to the condition, in this case, that Morpheus AI DAO approves the transaction, right? So here we are, token exchanger, and now both parties have signed. And the next step is to deposit the tokens, right? Now, in this case, the agreement says that the parties will deposit the tokens as promptly as reasonably practicable after signing, right? You can imagine a different version that says they just have to deposit anytime before closing, right? But I figure if you're entering into a deal, of this sort, and you have this on-chain escrow, you probably want the tokens to be there, right? In fact, maybe the parties are communicating with each other extrinsically. They're probably saying to each other, well, look, I'm not going to go and make this whole proposal to Morpheus AI DAO to get this deal approved until I know that you've actually deposited your Anon tokens first, right? Because those are the tokens we're buying. So it's just not even worth the trouble of doing that unless you've deposited, right? So there's all kinds of things that can happen off chain here as well, right? We still live in the real world. For this purpose, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deposit, both sides of the token. And yeah, I agreed. Boom, I deposit my Anon tokens. And then if I go back and change to the view of the proposing party here, wallet, connect that wallet, and so now it's to the proposing party's view, right? And now I need to deposit the proposing party's side of the agreement. And so I will give it the permission to do that. And actually, I realized I never completed the deposit for the confirming party because of the damnable ETH 2-step transaction process, right? That everyone loves so much. So I'm going to complete the deposit here. Boom, done. And then I'm going to go back to that confirming party view, finish the deposit because I already did the approval and forgot about the second step. Now both parties have deposited. Yay. Okay. So the transaction is fully teed up. And as far as on-chain is concerned, as far as the app is concerned, it actually can be closed at this point at any time. There are no on-chain conditions for this one. There is an off-chain condition in the legal agreement that the DAO has approved the transaction, right? We just have to know that as parties, right? And we have to go and do that and in this particular case, verify off-chain that that's happened. Again, you could imagine putting that on chain. We have ways to put that on chain, but it's a little too specific and nuanced. So it's not in the general app. We could put something like that together for people. But in this case, let's just assume that DAO approval has happened. So now all the conditions are satisfied. The tokens are deposited, the approval's there. The expiration date has not yet hit, right? We're still in the deal closing window because the expiration date is on January 14th, right? 2025. So we have 30 days until then, basically. We're good. We can close it, right? Ready to execute, right? Now, what is this thing here? Request to terminate. What is that? Well, if you go back and read the agreement, you'll see that there are termination provisions. And one of basically the 2 ways it can terminate is if the transaction isn't closed by a certain date, right, by the expiration date, or by mutual consent. Both parties agree to terminate, right? So let's just say, while we were waiting for the DAO approval, Anon price went up a lot, right? And Morpheus price went down a lot. And I'm saying to myself, this is a bad deal. I never should have signed this deal. Maybe I request to terminate, and I DM the proposing party at the legal contact address that we have in the contract, right? I'm going to have, and I could go back, right? I could go back and do the full agreement. I say, I need to beg this guy. We got to terminate this deal. It's not a fair deal anymore. I never should have done this deal. Okay. Well, I have his Telegram info, right? And if I message him there, that's going to be deemed, legal notice, right, to him under this agreement. So I've requested the termination, right? And I'm going to message him. I'm going to say, please, man, it's not a good deal anymore. Please terminate. And, unfortunately, since this is me talking to myself, I'm a savage. I don't care. In fact, I'm happy. I'm happy that I'm getting the way better end of this bargain. It's the entire reason I signed the deal in the first place, is hoping the price would move against this Gabe's alter ego while the deal was waiting to close and while he was going and chasing the DAO approval and all that stuff, right? Maybe I've even been fudding his token in the meantime, trying to make it, trying to make it go down. So I'm not going to accept that termination, actually. And I am actually, so yeah, so I'm going to, go ahead and switch views again, right? So now I'm at the proposing party view and I see, oh yeah, he requested a termination. Oh, I can confirm the termination, but no, he's an idiot and he's totally out of luck. I'm closing the deal anyway, right? Yes, and this is reminding you that, hey, there may be off-chain conditions that you guys agreed to. So go back and look at and here's what that condition was. It was that Morpheus AI DAO approved the transaction prior to closing. I misspelled approved, but so it goes. And no, I will happily confirm. Now, if that condition wasn't satisfied and I close the deal anyway, well, the guy's going to be able to sue me, basically, right? That's why on-chain conditions are better, right? Because you don't have to worry that the guy closed the deal when he shouldn't have, and then you have to go sue him, right? It's just like an objective oracle or something like that, right? So we can definitely set that up for people, and we may add some stuff like that. Like maybe we'll add a price oracle or something if you guys have a particular interest in some kind of condition that we can represent on chain. Definitely let us know. But anyway, so I just closed the deal, right? So now, I have, well, if I were to go look at my account on Etherscan, you can see that, yeah, I've gotten 10 anon. Right. And obviously previously I had given up 5 Morpheus tokens, right? So it's deposited in the smart contract. And then when I closed the deal, I got the other guys in on, he got my Morpheus. It's a done deal unless I breached the agreement. And so that's pretty much it. So yeah, this kind of like illustrates the type of stuff we're going to be doing. You could imagine many other things here, right? This is just kind of a simple example. But you could imagine the tokens could be like a safe or a SAFT that you bought in some startup, right? And the Rule 144 period is over. It's freely tradable. And, you want to diversify your risk and you want to sell it to your friend. He wants to buy in at a higher value or something like that. He's very, very bullish. You got to make it, safe or SAFT, and he's very bullish and you want to go ahead and sell to him. Well, you can imagine tokenizing that SAFT as an NFT or whatever, and then selling it through this same type of process, right? Real estate, right? There's already like real estate NFTs, like Materium has done, NFTing of particular properties. Like basically the NFT is literally like the title to the property, right? You could do it with all kinds of things, right? So we're very interested in all these sorts of setups, and it plugs into kind of like our ultimate plan to put entities on chain, right? Borgs. Because if you imagine a platform where there are many, many Borgs, well, they're going to want to do deals between them, right? They might want to sell intellectual property between them, or intellectual property licenses, or various securities between them, or all kinds of things, right? And usually that will be a deferred closing deal, and so we represent these things via token, these property rights via token. We put in the smart contract. You can basically do anything, right? It's pretty cool. And you can do it very trustlessly. No intermediaries, right? All of this is unruggable by us, right? If X went away tomorrow, if this web app went away tomorrow, all the data is on chain. You could pull it up yourself. This agreement is, on IPFS, all those things, right? So it really doesn't need us. The smart contract is unruggable. There's no admin on the smart contract. There is a fee. There's a small fee, a 4 bips aggregate, which is much less than what an OTC desk would charge or anything like that. And, that's basically optional in a sense as well, right? Because all our smart contracts are open source, et cetera. But, you could consider it sort of a tip for us providing the convenience of the web app and that sort of thing. Maybe I should have called it a tip instead of a donation. It's called a donation in the agreement. I now actually think tip would be more apt, to be honest. But yeah, that's how it works. So let us know what you think. I mean, I think if you're doing a token swap with your friend, this is actually a pretty badass way to do it. It's pretty simple. It's pretty fast. No intermediaries, and there's no trust, right? I mean, even if you don't care about any type of legal things or anything like that, the only thing you care about is just like, in every token OTC deal I've seen, they're usually done in Telegram, right? And there's always this issue of like, who's going to send the tokens first, right? Because you're sending your tokens to some EOA, right, owned by some guy, And it's like, okay, well, is he actually going to send the other tokens back to me? Right. This totally fixes that first mover type of issue, right? Because there's a smart contract escrow, right? So, the deal can't close until both sets of tokens are in the smart contract, and then it closes trustlessly, right? So that's a cool aspect as well, even putting aside all these legal type things, right? It's just pure kind of game theory, right? So yeah, that's the demo in a nutshell. I would love to know, what people think about this, how it could be improved, whether you want any customized features, we could definitely prepare those as a kind of service, or you want, and as you see, I should note as well that there becomes a deal hub here, right? If you go back to the original page, right? And so, you know, all this deal is stored here, right? Or it's being pulled from the chain. But you can imagine if you've done a bunch of these deals, okay, you would see like 1, 2, 3, 4 listed on this page, and you could go back, even years later, look up the details for them if you need an audit trail for your tax accounting or whatever it is, or there is a legal dispute and you need to pull up the records about it, right? It's all here. And you can imagine as we set up more and more of these things, it'll become kind of a deal hub. And, you'd have all kinds of information on our platform and like be using our platform to do these sorts of things. So that's the goal in a nutshell. And yeah, hit me up at LexNode on Twitter, at LexNode on Telegram, at LexNode pretty much everywhere. That's LEX_Gabriel Shapiro, MetaLeX. We out.